I'm first-generation Mexican-American, and I've been a UU for about 20 years and a member of this church since 2016. The first time I entered this church was on opening Sunday in September of 2015, at the beginning of the scholastic year. I had just moved to San Francisco after a divorce, and I'd only ever been a member of a tiny congregation in Los Gatos. I had signed my 13-year-old son Max up for religious education classes and was told to meet in the lobby with the other families so that we could walk into the sanctuary together. As the families gathered in the hallway, I was excited to see so many kids because there weren't many in our other congregation. The children were given balloons as we waited and chatted. After a while, we heard music, and we were led through the doors into the sanctuary. I'm not sure I can accurately describe the surprise when Max and I entered for the very first time. We'd never seen the sanctuary before. I hadn't even looked it up online. We were blown away. It was huge compared to our little church, with the vaulted ceilings and the choir and the pipe organ and the stained glass windows and the enormous congregation singing. As we made our way down the red carpet in the hubbub of kids and balloons, my son looked at me and said, "Mom, I feel like a king." We found a spot in the front pews with the rest of the families. And then the service started. And the congregation sang the doxology in Spanish. De todos bajo el gran sol, surja esperanza, fe, amor, verdad y belleza, cantado de cada tierra, cada voz. Mom, I feel like a king. The principles of Unitarian Universalism call us into covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. They promote justice, equity, compassion, the democratic process, peace, liberty. I volunteered to chair the 8th Principle Task Force because I believe deeply in our principles. They resonate with me because I have spent too much of my life working my way through mazes of systemic racism. So, it is devastating when it shows up here in the community that I love. I know it's hard to hear that racism exists in our church. But if we're honest, we need only to look at the makeup of our congregation to understand that it is here. There's a disturbing trope that's been coming up frequently in our community conversations about the 8th principle that seems to try to explain this away. It says that the reason that the congregation doesn't look like the rest of the community is that Unitarian Universalism's sedate, intellectual style just doesn't speak to people of color. I don't know what's worse about this idea. The insulting implication that people of color are loud and somehow too intellectually deficient to handle Unitarian Universalism, or the implied white ownership of the religion, the idea that there is only one way to actualize it, and that way is the white way. Attempts to assuage the hurtfulness of the trope by saying that the people of color who are here are high-achieving outliers only adds insult to injury. This has been used time and again to excuse limiting our access to all sorts of institutions. Like the librarian in my elementary school who refused to let me check out books that were above my level. Or the high school senior counselor who helpfully advised me, college is hard, but Montgomery Ward's has a great training program for cashiers. This is not new to me. And yet I'm here. And not because I'm an outlier. I'm here because Unitarian Universalism doesn't shrink to accommodate fear or hubris. I'm here because Unitarian Universalism doesn't cow down to tradition or habit. I'm here because it calls us to expand our heart for one another. The grace that Unitarian Universalism offers is expansive enough to hold me, even when my brethren struggle to. The reality is that people of color do bump into racism in our church. And it makes it hard for us to reach the level of vulnerability that's required to connect to a spiritual practice. So many of us leave. And racism doesn't necessarily have to be spoken out loud to be communicated. The consistent absence of multicultural expression and diversity in our church, year after year after year, is telling us that something isn't right. The eighth principle calls out racism specifically because it needs to. Because for far too long, racism has insidiously undermined the other 7 principles we covenant to affirm and promote. And it undermines our 6 sources. It undermines our religion. Adopting the 8th principle will be our congregation's way of committing to shine a bright light at the dim corners within ourselves and our institution where racism likes to hide. My participation in the 8th principle task force is an act of hope. You see, I believe in us. I believe that we can grow together. I believe that UUSF is a community that values the humanity of Black people, of Indigenous people, of Asian and Pacific Islanders, of Latinas like me, of all people of color. I do. And I believe that UUSF is a place where the work of dismantling racism will be taken to heart. Because we are seekers. We are the ones who question everything as we search for truth and meaning. I believe that this creative, brilliant, joyful congregation can become a leader in the fight for liberation against systemic racism. We are the San Francisco congregation, after all. I mean, Star King is literally here with us. I want to be part of the effort to build an active, consistent, foundational inclusivity in this church. Because that opening Sunday in 2015, when Max and I came down the aisle and met you, we experienced the difference it makes when a congregation takes the time to learn to expand its song. In April of 2016, the religious education classes came to an end, and Max and his cohorts were asked to say what they believed in for their coming-of-age presentations. After only 1 year in this church, my son declared, "I believe in love." Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung through every land, by every tongue. May it be so.